Hey everyone, how's it going? In this video, we are going to look at how to make some really simple UI with one single Python pip package. So let's just get to it. All right, so here we are. The package we're using today is called PyQt 5, and we're gonna go over 5 different examples, ending with a timer, just a simple timer. And we're gonna go through each of them here, and they're all just kind of gonna gradually build off of one another. So let's start off. The first one that we have here is this simple window, which when we launch this program, it is going to be creating this little simple window, and it's going to actually match whatever operating system you have. So if you're on a Mac or if you're on Linux, it will create the window in the format, because it's a window, of whatever operating system you're using. So pretty cool. All right, so how does it work? So to start off, if you want to follow along, you can do pip install PyQt 5. Make sure you do that on the right Python that you're using. And we're going to import system, and we're going to also import from PyQt 5 Qt widgets. We're going to import Q application and Q widget. Now, we are then going to create a class that is going to extend Q widget. And what that means is that we're going to be getting a lot of the methods that the QWidget class provides. So you'll kind of see that a little bit more in just a second. Next, we're going to do def init self, just create our initialization function, and we're going to do super init. So this is going to basically call the init function for QWidget. Then we're going to call self init UI, which is calling this little function here. And this function we're calling set geometry. And what this is a function that QWidget supports, and it's basically defining how large you want the widget to be, in this case, our simple window. The parameters for this function are the x coordinate, the y coordinate, the width, and then the height. So the x and y are just the x and y of your screen, and then the width and the height, obviously the width in pixels and the height in pixels of the window. Then we are calling setWindowTitle, and again, this is just another method that the QWidget supports that allows you to set the title for your window. All right, pretty simple. Then we go within our if name equals main, which if you've never really written a lot of Python before, this is effectively like if you've written other programming languages, this is like the main function, but it's just an if statement rather than a function. It doesn't mean that this is actually called first. It means like the script runs first, but then main is the name of the thing. So anyways, we get within here and we create our app, which is our Q application. And the reason we have system here is because we need to reference it for exiting, but we also reference it for this argv. This means that we can pass parameters from when we initialize or run our script into the Q application. Then we create a window, which is our simple window class. We don't need to pass any inputs or anything. You could pass in like a title here and then use the title here if you want, but we don't have to do that. And then we call window.show, which will actually make the window appear. And finally, we do system.exit, and then we pass in this app.exec underscore function. And what this is, and I believe the way this is implemented is it's a type of semaphore or mutex, I don't remember exactly which one, which actually causes this to pause. So this part pauses in a separate thread, and it's just kind of waiting for you to exit the application before it will actually exit the script. Otherwise, if we got rid of this line, the window would pop up and it would go away immediately. I can show you what that looks like. Not very useful. So we need that line. If that's what happens, then you probably are missing that line. All right, cool. So let's move on to hopefully a bit more of a useful example. So now we are creating a window with a button. So if we go ahead and do this here, we can see that we get a window and we get a button, which when we click me, it says button clicked in our console. So that just means, you can do whatever you need to do when you click the button. But how does this work? So the if name equals main is the exact same. This is the exact same. But we are importing a couple of different things. So we're still importing our Q application and Q widget, but then we're also importing this Q push button and this QV box layout. Now, after we have named the window and set the geometry, we are creating a button, which is a Q push button, and we're setting the title of this button to click me, and then we're setting the second value here to self. This means which instance or which class are we going to be referencing with this Q push button. So this self class, this Q widget that we're creating here. Then we say button.click.connect, which means that when a button is clicked, we want it to call whatever we pass connect, which is this self on button click, which is a function we have here, which is why when we click the button, we see button clicked. And then finally, we add our button to this QVBox layout. So QVBox layout is a layout that is added to our widget. And then we add the button to it. And that's why it's centered and not just kind of like up in the corner and not looking too pretty. Awesome. So that's how we can play with some buttons. Now, what if we want a menu? Well, we can do that too. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. So we have this window with a menu where we have this menu bar, and you can see that it has a little button called subscribe. Maybe if you want to do that. And if we click it, it says thank you. And this bottom part is called a status bar. Now, let's go into how this actually works. We can do file exit now. Pretty cool. So again, the if name equals main is the exact same. A lot of this is also the exact same. But one thing that's different here is we now aren't extending the Q widget class. We are now extending the Q main window. And that's really important because the Q main window has a menu bar, whereas the Q widget doesn't. So in this case, within our init UI, we get a reference to this menu bar calling self.menubar. And then once we have that reference, we can then add in different menus. So here we do menu bar.add menu, and we add the file menu. But then this also returns a reference to that file menu. So we want to make sure that we set our file menu to that returned reference. Otherwise, we can't really add anything to it that easily. So once we have created our reference to the file menu and created that menu itself, we can then start adding some Q actions. So this is another thing we're importing, as well as this Q status bar and Q label, which we'll get to in a second. So once we've created a Q action, we call it subscribe, and we again say that it's going to live within the self, this Q main window context. We then have this subscribe.trigger.connect, which is almost the same as the buttons button.clicked.connect, but instead it's called triggered rather than clicked. And in this case, we have it call two separate things here, depending on which one we click. So for subscribe, we have it execute sub please. But for our exit action, we call self.close. So self.close isn't actually implemented right here. It is actually something that the Q main window provides. So again, it's just something, because we have extended the Q main window class, we get access to whatever it had. If you're a little bit confused about how that works, you can check out this video right up here where I go over class inheritance, and I actually just did a series on classes. So if you want a quick dive into classes, maybe not super quick, but decently quick, check those out. All right, once we have created these actions, we then add them to our file menu. Now you'll also notice here that the order we add them in is the order that they show up. So you might think that the last one you add is actually at the top, but that's not the case. So we add subscribe first, and then we add exit. So it actually shows up with subscribe and then exit. Awesome. Next thing here is we have a status bar. So we define our status bar, and we set the status bar of our window to be the status bar we've created, because it doesn't have one by default. So you have to create one and then set it. Then once we have that status bar, we are going to create a status label, and we're actually going to call this self.status label so that we can reference it throughout our class as well, specifically within our subPlease function. So when we create this label, it's just a Q label with set to ready and self. And then we finally are going to add this self.status label to our status bar. Pretty simple. So now when we click our subPlease, we can reference our status label and set the text to thank you. So again, subscribe, thank you. If you want to subscribe, that'd be cool too. But you don't have to, that's totally fine. All right, moving on. What if you want a dialog? What if you want to pop up a window from your window? Pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get rid of this and run dialog And in this case, we have our little dialog example. And when we click open dialog, it opens a whole other window. And you'll actually notice that this window makes it so that you can't actually interact with the original window. So you can't click it. And that noise is coming from my computer, not yours, so don't worry. If I click X, then I can once again interact with this window. So this is really useful if you want to be able to open it up to allow users to like interface with some settings or something like that. All right, let's close this down and see how this works. So again, the name is the same, the if name equals main. All of this is about the same. We are using Q main window again. And in this case, we have our Q push button because we need a button to open the dialog. We have our QV box layout, we have our Q dialog, and our Q label. Then we create our Q push button. We call it open dialog, which this is kind of, you're familiar with this from the last one. And then we create our QV box layout and we add it to this box layout. Then when this is clicked, we do something a little bit different. We then create a dialog using Q dialog. You'll notice everything just has Q in front of whatever you want. You'll even say that that's actually kind of crazy, more so in the next example. But then for this dialog, we're then going to set the geometry, set the dialog's name, and then add a label to this dialog. But you'll notice that we're not adding it to any layout. And rather than referencing self at the end here, we're referencing dialog. Because again, whatever you set here is what it's connecting it to. So this is going to be adding it to the Q dialog because that's what we specify. If we specified self, it would then add it to our window, which is not what we want. Finally, we call dialog.exec, and this is then going to run our dialog. Awesome. So that's how the dialog works. Now let's move on to the cooler example here, which is the timer. So the timer here is, I think probably the coolest example, obviously, we've gone through so far. But we create a little timer here where you can specify some amount of time. Let's go like 4 seconds, and it will start counting down. And when it hits 0, we get a time's up, and it gives you a little notification. Pretty cool. So let's see how it works. So it's a lot more complicated than what we've usually done, but let's go over what we import first. So this is another Q widget. It's not a Q window that we're using this time. So we are importing Q application to be able to manage the runtime of our application. A Q widget, Q label, Q line edit, so the user can input text. Then Q push button, QV box layout, and Q message box, which is what allows us to have pop-ups like that because it's not a dialog, it's just an actual pop-up. Then from PyQt5.qt core, this is basically like core things that the PyQt framework allows us to use. We're importing Q timer, Q time, and Qt, which is basically a way to use alignments and stuff like that. Although to be honest, we probably don't need it for this. All right, so again, a lot of the things are kind of the same with how we initialize this to start, except here we are then setting self.timer running to false. This is when we first initialize our timer app, and also time left equals 0. So this is basically the value that is going to be testing whether or not we have our timer running, obviously. And then time left is how much time do we have left before the timer is up. All right, init UI, we have timer app as the title, which is pretty simple. So then we create our Q label, which is going to be set to 00:00, and we set it to self. Then we set the alignment for this label to align center so that it's going to be centered. The text will be centered. And then we set the style sheet. The style sheet, I believe, is basically like HTML, CSS type of stuff. But in this case, we're setting the style to font size of 48 pixels. So that's just like if you set like the font size to 48 pixels in like Google Docs or Word or something like that. Then we create our start button, which is a Q push button called start. And then we connect it to call start timer. Then we create another button, stop, which we'll call stop timer, and reset, which we'll call reset timer. Then we create our time entry, which is the thing that allows the user to input how much time they would like. And we then set the placeholder text to enter time in a minute, $second format. This is so we can make sure that when the user inputs the value, we can read it and ensure it works properly. Next, we are creating our box layout, and we are going to go ahead and add all of our little widgets that we have created here. Okay, so how does the timer work? Well, when we click start, if the timer is already running, because if timer is running is true and then not true is false, so we would not go through this if the timer is running. But if the timer is not running, then we're going to try to determine what the number is that the user has entered using this qtime.fromString. So this is something that they actually provide. To be honest, you can probably just do this without anything, right? You could just say that, like, you can just say the number of seconds that you want or something like that, or minutes and then seconds. We could do whatever you want here, but this is just what we have here. I just kind of wanted to show that, there are all these other libraries that PyQt provides, which I think is kind of cool. So in this case, we're then going to try to determine how many minutes and seconds are coming from this text using this here. And then we're assigning that to time. Time will then have a minute and second. And then here we're just doing time.minutes times 60 so that we can convert that into seconds and then add on the seconds there at the end. Then we're going to set that the timer is true, and then we're going to call update timer. And if we run into any errors when we're doing this, we're going to pop up a warning message box saying that there's an error and there was an invalid time format, and please use it in this format. All right, now what does update timer do? Well, update timer is going to check if the timer is running and the time left is greater than 0, then we are going to create a time string using our Qt time, where we're going to set the number of hours, and then we're going to do the time left, and then this divided by 60 is actually basically removing the remainder after you do division. So this means that, like, if you did 180 divided by 60 is 3. But if you did 150 divided by 60, you would still just want this to be 2, right? Because this is technically 2.5, but we don't care about the half because the half is 30 seconds. So basically what we would do here is then just kind of cut off that half and just make it equal 2. So that's what this is doing here. Then we do self.timeleft mod 60 is what this % means. And what that means is that, again, with our 150 example, if we do 150 mod 60, that actually would equal 30 because it is the difference between, or like the remainder after we have done our division. So there is still 30 left over because 60 times 2 is 120, and then there's 30 left to get it to 50. So then this is what we get here. So this is the minutes, this is the seconds, and then this is the hours, which we just set to 0. All right, then we do toString minute, second, which is something that our qtime thing provides here. And then we set the time label to that string. Then, because we're going to run this every second, we do time left minus equals 1, which is just subtracting 1 from how much time we have left. And then we're using this handy little thing they have here, which is this qtimer.singleshot 1000, which is in milliseconds. So how often we want this to run this function. So it's going to a single time run in basically a second this update timer again. So it's going to continually do this and until it can't do it anymore. So what happens when it can't do it anymore? Well, if we get to the point where we're running our timer, but now the time left is no longer greater than 0, then we would fall down to this else if, which is when the timer is running and the time left is now 0. Well, in this case, the timer running is now false because we have finished running our timer. And we're going to pop up our message box saying that the timer's done, time is up. Awesome. So now for the other methods, they're kind of simple. Stop timer, we just set it to no longer be running. Pretty easy. And then reset timer, we again set it to not be running. We set the time left to be 0. And then we set the text for the time label to be 00. And we clear the time entry. This is what the user has entered. And that's it. these are some super simple examples of some of the things you can do with PyQt. But honestly, I think making UI from code is some of the most satisfying things you can do with code. I actually just, in my spare time, have been creating a app using Flutter, which is in the Dart programming language, which I'd never actually touched before. And I actually did a couple of streams with it. So if you want to check those out, feel free. But I had so much fun doing it that I kind of went overboard and finished the app off stream. So I'm sorry. But I'm definitely going to stream again. And maybe if you want, I can show off the app. Or if you want me to make a video about the app, I would absolutely love to do that as well. So let me know in the comments down below. But that's all for this video. Thank you so much. But remember, I'm Jake. You're awesome. And this has been Python PyQt. Cheers.